all of this talk about promotion and relegation and how it could be used in college football, well, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. It's not saving the Pac-12. It's not going to benefit the sport. It just doesn't add up. Sure, it's fun to talk about. It's fun to come up with various hypotheses and scenarios about how promotion and relegation could work, but in reality, it is not a workable concept. In many ways, the chatter reminds me of the episode of Seinfeld where Newman and Kramer try to make the 10-cent Michigan bottle deposit scheme work.
Wait a minute, you mean you get 5 cents here and 10 cents there? You could round up bottles here and run them out to Michigan for the difference.
That doesn't work.
This is one of those things that sounds great as a thinking out loud exercise, but when you root around in the nuts and bolts, it does not add up. Even if you could hypothetically make promotion and relegation in college football work at some level, well, more likely than not, you'd still end up with Jerry's mechanic throwing JFK's golf clubs at you.
You have to do a lot better than that!
Many of you out there are probably wondering just who the hell am I to say this? I am Cheyenne Hollis, an OG American soccer hipster. I'm the guy who bought a Jonathan Woodgate number 27 Newcastle United jersey from Subside Sports some 20 years ago. I'm the guy who went to Athens, said, nah, I'm good on the Acropolis, went all the way out to Piraeus in the suburbs to check out where Olympiacos played. And then later that same day, I headed up to see the Athens Olympic Stadium. Not because it hosted the Olympics, mind you, but because that's where AEK Athens played. I'm the guy in college who wore random soccer team scarves and insisted people call soccer football while getting super excited about Bobby Convey signing for Reading. I am the guy who has spent hours, nay, days, playing Football Manager, navigating Union Deportiva Melilla from the Spanish Segunda regional divisions all the way up to La Liga. I could really keep going on and on here, but I will spare you from the tales of an OG American soccer hipster. What I will say to you is this though. As someone who has a pretty firm grasp of both soccer and college football, I can tell you fairly certainly that promotion and relegation, it just simply will not work in college football. There are various schools of thought as it relates to just how promotion and relegation could be worked into the college football landscape. Some have suggested models that run akin to what is seen in England with the English Premier League, the Championship, League One, League Two, so on and so forth. In those models, a team that goes down is replaced by a team from a lower division that goes up. It's a straight swap. Others have proposed a more nuanced approach to promotion and relegation, something similar to what you may see for the final relegation and promotion slot in the German Bundesliga, where one team from the top division will play another team from a bottom division in a playoff to determine who exactly gets to play in the top flight the following season. If I'm being honest with you, they all sound interesting. They all sound pretty cool, and they do sound like they could work at least in a vacuum. However, as we all know, college football does not exist in a vacuum. Sports do not exist in a vacuum. We as human beings do not exist in a vacuum. Let's start our journey into the feasibility of promotion and relegation in college football by addressing a very important elephant in the room, that being, of course, Americans refuse to accept losing. Hell, we just saw Florida State turn to their government to get involved with their snub from the college football playoff. Say what you will about the Brits and Europe soccer fans as a whole, but they are far more willing to accept sporting losses, well, in most cases. What you can certainly say is that there is an acceptance of the stakes involved when it comes to supporting a soccer team playing in a certain division. There is an agreement made by every fan that they know the score. They know what will happen should their team finish at the bottom of the table. As a Newcastle United supporter, I experienced a self-inflicted disastrous relegation back in 2009. It sucked. It was a crappy experience and one that should have been avoided. However, I, like most Newcastle United fans, understood what the name of the game was. Heck, by the time the next season arrived, I was all in. I actually went out and purchased a Jose Enrique jersey with the championship patches and the championship numbers because I felt like, you know what? I was going to be there for the ride. If we were going to be in the championship, I might as well enjoy it. Sure, as a whole, Newcastle United did see some drops in attendance and the team wasn't as supported as well as it had been in the Premier League. But by and large, it wasn't just a falling off of a cliff for support of the team, and that is important to note. The idea college football fan bases would be amped up or excited or even willing to tolerate play at a lower level of a classification or division or conference or whatever you want to call it is far-fetched, to say the least. As an Idaho alum, I actually have experience with this when our program dropped from FBS to FCS. There was a large number of people who decided that they were going to have nothing to do with Idaho football when the decision was made to drop. And really, I think you can still see that cliff existing to this day. Sure, Idaho has had a few winning seasons at the FCS level, but the support and the passion for the program is not at the level it was when we were in the FBS, and it probably never will be unless we go back to the top flight of college football. So inversely, expecting fans to turn out in droves should their team be relegated, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense here. Beyond fan bases, you also need to explore the element of college football team building, which is unlike anything that exists in the sporting world. Even in the transfer portal era, college football teams, especially ones outside of the sport's upper echelon, aren't built like professional sports teams. Instead, you see a lot of cycling. Things sort of ebb and flow over the years. By that, I mean it's not unusual to see a program build up for a year or two, peak, take a step back, start to reload again, peak again a few years later, and just keep going through that cycle of having, one or two good seasons, maybe having a down season, having another good season, and just so on and so forth over the years. Very rarely do you see a school at the non-playoff contention level routinely put up winning season after winning season. It should be noted the drop between that peak and the following year may not necessarily be massive. That, of course, has a lot to do with the teams around you. The difference between a 10-win G5 school and an 8-win G5 school, it's not going to be a hell of a lot. But if you were to put that 8-win G5 program into a P5 conference, their results the following season are going to look a hell of a lot different. They may win 8 games the following year in the G5 conference, but in a P5 conference going up against higher competition, it is much more likely they're going to win 3 or 4 games, barring, extenuating circumstances. More importantly, though, you're not rewarding the team that was good in the season it played. You're rewarding a different team, a team that actually had nothing to do with winning the 10 games or getting promoted in the first place. Yeah, I understand there's going to be some continuity there, but it's not the same. Like, when you have a team in the championship, even though you're going to chop and change players and you're going to bring in new signings and let players go, the team is still the team. In college football, teams drastically are altered from season to season. So a team that gets promoted and a team that would be the actual side that plays the promoted season is going to be just completely different. It's again, apples and oranges here. Of course, schools today can reload a lot faster thanks in part to the transfer portal. That, though, brings up a whole host of other issues that we now need to dive into. The difference between money in the different divisions will be massive. I mean, if you're talking about the money handed out at the top division and in the division below it and the division below that, there's going to be huge gulfs there. For example, like as we see currently, Pac-12 schools and RIP, they got roughly $30 million a year from TV rights and all their other revenue. Mountain West schools got closer to $7 million, and Big Sky schools are at like $1.5 million. I mean, there's huge gaps of money involved with this. Schools will bankrupt themselves chasing the dream, and others will drive themselves into financial ruin, unable to cope with smaller budgets that are required by relegation. The unspoken reality of promotion and relegation in college football, and the one thing that people just don't want to talk about, is the money, the thing that continues to kill the sport. In England, Premier League clubs make roughly 3 times the amount of money that championship sides would make. That gap is smaller between the championship and League One, and it's actually smaller elsewhere in Europe in League or Serie A or La Liga or wherever you look. But wherever you go, there is a noticeable gap between top flight and lower division sides. With a huge pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, you see a lot of clubs not exactly acting rationally. In the English Championship, for example, most teams' salary expenses outstrip their revenues and have for some time. It's not like that elsewhere in Europe, by the way, but we are also talking about college football here, a sport where acting rationally or doing the fiscally responsible thing, well, it just doesn't happen. Does anyone actually think college football programs are going to act with the restraint and fiscal discipline of a second division German Bundesliga club with dollar signs and visibility just staring them right in the face? Even if teams don't blow their wad trying to gain promotion, those teams that do get promoted happen to spin through the nose trying to get players to play for them, especially in that first season at the higher level. This is a huge issue that most newly promoted soccer teams face. They tend to end up paying inflated prices for average or even below average players, some of whom were relegated this season before. Earnings are just absolutely blown through faster than they can come in. That's despite the reality there is no guarantee for the team to remain in the top flight the following season. You're basically gambling your future with this kind of spending. That is actually what led to the creation of parachute payments in England. You see, teams that were relegated from the top flight really found bridging the financial gap between the Premier League and the Championship to be near impossible. Prior to the creation of parachute payments, many relegated sides found themselves on the precipice of bankruptcy, and without the extra cash would have likely just wiped themselves off the face of the soccer playing world. However, that extra cash, it isn't always enough. In fact, when you look at relegation in the Premier League in particular, there are really three true outcomes clubs face. The first, a team will just keep spending at Premier League levels in hopes of bouncing right back up the following season. That is great if it does happen, but potentially ruinous if they cannot get that promotion. The second is to cut costs, consolidate your position, and hope you can stay competitive in the lower league. If you get a promotion, that's great, but again, you're really just trying to survive and make do in the new financial world you find yourself in. The third is that the team is so bad and has made so many short-sighted decisions trying to stay up that it just finds itself in free fall, ending up tumbling down the football pyramid. This in turn usually creates financial ruin, and it just is an absolute mess requiring years, if not decades, to clean up. There's also a dark side to promotion that hasn't been talked about enough as it relates to college football. The best case scenario is that you go up, you're able to be competitive through a combination of efficient team building and usually some good coaching. The club is then able to consolidate its position over the first 2 to 3 years in the top flight and really just sort of builds the foundations for a long-term platform. This, by the way, is a realistic goal, but isn't always easy to achieve with bigger clubs, bigger teams sniffing around coaches and sniffing around players because they are usually the ones fundamental to this success. You can build a system, you can build recruitment efforts, you can find and scout new players, but it's just not always easy to keep everything together. Unfortunately, many newly promoted clubs don't find themselves in that scenario. In fact, they face a very different reality. That being a vicious cycle of short-term survival. They will cycle through coaches, they will cycle through players, they will burn through all available cash and even some future earnings just trying to keep their head above water. It's completely unsustainable even if they do manage to secure promotion in that first season because they will just go through the same cycle again in year 2. All this really does is just create bigger and bigger problems that eventually end up biting them in the ass later on down the road. That brings us to what I feel is the biggest issue as it relates to college football and promotion and relegation. For better or for worse, soccer teams are businesses here. College football programs are part of an athletic department, which is part of a larger university. While a soccer team with a load of history and a passionate fan base going under sucks, like make no mistake, I want to emphasize this is one of the worst things that can happen in sports. That being said, though, the collapse of that soccer team is still contained. A college football program facing financial ruin wouldn't just be a burden on itself, it would drag down the athletic department, it would drag down the university as a whole. It's not crazy to think about a scenario where a university is forced to cut academic programs or let go of staff or reduce offerings for students because the football team was spending above its means. A student at a college should not have to worry about their education being endangered because the football team wanted to get promoted. And that is a very plausible scenario in the case of promotion and relegation being implemented in college football. Now, yeah, you could try to put guardrails in place. Maybe those could make promotion and relegation in college football work. At the same time, though, the sport of college football is one that invites, it almost begs for rule breaking and gray area exploitation. Could you create a world where promotion and relegation in college football was feasible? Absolutely. Would teams do their best to circumnavigate rules and regulations and bend rules and just, it would be messy. Like, let's be honest, it would be messy, it would be gross, and I think everyone would just be unhappy with it. That's what it really all comes down to as it relates to promotion and relegation in college football. A fun thought experiment? Sure, absolutely. I mean, go wild with it if you want to. But the reality is, promotion and relegation will never ever work in college football. Much like the Michigan bottle deposit scam, it just doesn't add up.
Hey, you're not talking that Michigan deposit bottle scam again,
No,
are you?
I'm off that.
Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't checked out my final goodbye to the Pac-12, well, you can do so in the video in the upper right hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and hashtag take it out to the 25.